So good evening. Welcome back to Thursday Nights in Revelation. We are going to be studying tonight Revelation chapter 11, and we're going to begin in verse 7. And if you remember, we have been, we kind of took a walk back to the very beginning of what we believe is the 7-year tribulation. And we went back and we saw at the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, 2 witnesses. They're unidentified, and they are carrying and proclaiming the message of the gospel of Jesus. And it seems as though their headquarters are primarily in Jerusalem. We don't know whether they ventured out of the city. We don't know if they ventured to other parts of the world. But what we do know is that they did preach and they did proclaim the truth about Jesus there in Jerusalem, and that they did face opposition. They did face people who were against them, resisted them, opposed them, and any who tried to physically do them harm, they burned to a crisp as fire came out of their mouths and burned them to a crisp. They were able to call down any plague at any time in any place in the world. And so the world is suffering because of them, because of the judgment of God. This is all a part of that judgment that is going in conjunction with the judgments that have been sequentially administered. And we've seen those through the 7 seals. We've seen those through the 7 trumpets. And right now we're in between trumpet 6 and trumpet 7. And I think as far as the timeline goes, I think it's critical to see that we're about to hit the halfway point in the 7-year tribulation. We're going to be at that 3.5-year mark, which seems to be it's a big date because there's a lot of things that happen at that halfway mark. For one, we see that the world ruler, the beast that comes up from the sea in chapter 13, the man of sin that's described in Daniel, the Antichrist that is many people like to call him, although John never uses that term. He rises to power, and he at this point is going to, and we'll read this when we get to chapter 13, he receives a fatal wound. And he miraculously revives and comes back to life. And from that, he commands all of the world to bow down and worship him. He moves into the reconstructed temple that has been reconstructed because he has begun and has set a contract with the nation of Israel that they can reinstitute and resume their temple worship, the temple sacrifices, and so on. And so now that he's been killed and he's come back to life again, he moves into the temple, he moves into the most holy place. He declares himself to be God and demands that everybody receive a mark of loyalty to him, and failure to do so can result in death. And so it's at that mark then that the Great Tribulation begins, the last 3.5 years. And so there's a lot of things that happen before and a lot of things that happen after. And John is trying to describe all the moving parts. And some of those moving parts are described in verse 11, specifically these 2 witnesses. So having said that, so that you have a little bit of a background, a little bit of a point of reference, we're going to begin reading in verse 7 about what happens with these two witnesses. And so you'll see hopefully on the screen here. I'll go ahead and read this, and you can follow along in your Bible or on the screen or both. Verse 7, John writes, when they finish their testimony, again, these 2 witnesses, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Then those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days and not allow their dead bodies to be put into graves. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry, and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Now, after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they ascended to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies saw them. In the same hour, there was a great earthquake, and a tenth of the city fell. In the earthquake, 7,000 people were killed, and the rest were afraid and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. Okay, so let's go back to verse 7, and let's kind of go through this and break this down and analyze some of this and see where questions might be and answer some of these questions. Okay, now notice, first of all, in verse 7, that these two witnesses are never stopped. They're never completely hindered from their work. Their work is to proclaim the gospel, to proclaim the good news of Jesus, and nothing gets in their way. Nothing stops them. Anybody that tries, fire comes out of their mouths. Their enemies, their adversaries are all just completely eliminated. But they keep doing this until they finish. Now notice that it's only when they finish that the beast now comes onto the scene. And notice that the beast here is called the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit. Now, if you remember back in, as we look at this at chapter 9, if we go back to Revelation chapter 9 in verse 1, and I'll do that right here, we see this bottomless pit, the abyss, as it were. It says, then the fifth angel sounded. Again, this is the fifth trumpet. I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit. Okay, so let's make clear that the beast that ascends from the bottomless pit is not Satan. Okay, Satan is the star that fell from heaven in chapter 9. And he is given the key to the bottomless pit. He doesn't come out of the bottomless pit. So he has authority over the bottomless pit. And so when he opens it, that's when those crazy locusts came out. But notice also that John says the beast now, this man of sin, the rider on the white horse, that we're going to go get into length in detail in chapter 13. He is also the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit. So he's coming out under the full authority of Satan. So he's working with Satan. He's in full compliance with Satan. They're working hand in hand. So the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will be the one that makes war against the two witnesses. And so it says that he'll make war against them and he'll win. And he'll win and he'll kill them. And that fits with the onset of the Great Tribulation. There is no one that's going to be able to stand in his way. There's no one that's going to slow him down. He will have complete world domination. He will be the single world leader. He will establish himself and convince the world that he is God. Anybody that opposes him is facing capital punishment. Okay, so that's where he is. So it stands to follow that he would win this war against these two witnesses.
How could he do that?
He would win this war. I'm sorry? Say it again.
I was wondering how he could do that, since the witnesses could have fired him too.
Well, notice that it was when they finished their testimony.
Well, then they lost their power, you think?
No, I don't know that they lost it. I think they knew their time was done. They knew their job was done, and they knew what the next step was going to be.
Oh, okay.
So I can see where that would be the case. And I think the key is that they finish. So these servants of God didn't lose anything. They voluntarily, I think they laid it down. Okay. And so you kind of wonder why, but as you read, you kind of figure out why. So notice the celebration now, and you'll see that in verse 8. We'll get to the celebration, but first let's make sure. Any questions so far on what's happened here in verse 7? Any
Yes.
observations? Yes, go
I
ahead.
have one. Back in the first seal, this man came charging on a white horse, and he came in peace to woo the Jews in Jerusalem. Well, it wasn't. I thought we figured out that was the Antichrist. That's
correct. And
he wasn't fierce then. He tried to take over the city, but he had to do it in a peaceful way, so they would listen to him. But what I'm getting at is, how did he get into the bottomless pit?
Okay, for a couple of things.
I missed out.
Okay, couple of things. Number one, he doesn't conquer Jerusalem. He doesn't go into, he's not going into Jerusalem until now. Okay. He's given his crown. He comes in peace. He's given the leadership of the world, and he does that at the onset. Okay, and so he's given this position. Okay, now he's described here as ascending out of the bottomless pit. And I think it's important to understand that the bottomless pit is under the authority of Satan, the dragon. Okay, so the star falls from heaven. He's given the key to the bottomless pit. So he has authority to bring them out. Now, when you read chapter 12 and you read chapter 13, you see that the beast now also comes from the sea, and that there's also a second beast that comes from the earth. And we know them as, we popularly call the beast from the sea the Antichrist, but he's analogous to the rider on the white horse, the first seal that you talked about. He's all, the beast also is the same beast here that ascends out of the pit, out of the bottomless pit. The other beast comes from the earth, and we know him as the false prophet. And he'll have authority, and he'll have supernatural powers as well. But they all work together with Satan. They all work together, and you can almost see that Satan is trying to devise for himself, create for himself an unholy trinity. Satan, beast from the sea, beast of the land. So he's doing this in open defiance against the triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit. So you need to, I think, to see him ascending out of the bottomless pit. John describes it in 13 as coming out of the sea of humanity, the sea of separation, the sea of mystery. And so you see that, I think, both describing the same person, the same individual.
Does the bottomless pit maybe be in hell or something?
No. I think it's important to know that the King James word hell translates a whole bunch of different words that you see in the Bible. And so they're different places. And I think it's important to keep the abyss or bottomless pit exactly that. I think it's distinctly different. Susie, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I'm getting confused.
Okay.
Back Revelation 9:1, the fallen star is Satan, and he is given the key to the bottomless pit. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So now back in 11, when we're talking here, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit, are we saying the beast is Satan?
No.
Okay.
Oh, he's the
So
dragon.
the beast is he's a creature. He will work with Satan.
Correct. And
Okay.
we have other places where he is identified. He's the same beast that if you go to, we'll go to, we mentioned this one, Revelation 6 and verse 1. If you go to Revelation 6 and verse 1, John writes, "Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals." So we're back to the first set of judgments, the 7 seals. One of the seals, I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and here's the key verse here, verse 2. "And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, but no arrows. And a crown was given to him." He didn't have to take the crown was given to him. And he's riding a white horse, which is a horse that represents a conquering king.
Right.
And so as he does this, he's given this authority. He's given this reign. A crown is given to him. And so he doesn't have to fight to earn his power. He doesn't have to fight to earn his position as ruler. And
Okay, and this is Satan. This is Satan.
No, this individual right here, the rider on the white horse, is going to be the same as the one that we just read in Revelation 11:7. He's the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit. So
okay.
so they're the same. Okay.
I think he's referred to as the Antichrist, right?
But yeah, he's referred to as Antichrist. I'm reluctant to use that, Jack, again, because John doesn't use that word.
Yeah, because I know he talks about the beast and the false prophet.
So then, Susie, to continue on with that, here's the other place where this same individual, beast that ascends from the bottomless pit and the rider on the white horse, this is the next place where we will see him, and that's in Revelation 13 in verse 1. Notice it says in Revelation 13 verse 1, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name." So this beast in Revelation 13 that's coming out of the sea, that's what I'm talking about here, is the same one that is the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit. And this is kind of Jim's question. Does he come out of the sea or does he come out of the pit? And I thought it was just the locust that came out of the pit. But I think the important thing to remember with the bottomless pit is who has the key to it. And that's Satan. Satan is the one who gives this beast his authority. He lets him out. He opens the door, as it were, for him to now become the world ruler. Does that make sense? So Susie, did I get that question answered?
Yeah, I just have to think some more.
Okay.
Well,
And please
we'll
keep asking the questions too, because these are great questions.
We have to remember there are 3 different characters there. The dragon is Satan, and the beast is the Antichrist, and the third one is the false prophet. And I like to think of them as the unholy trio or Trinity. In other words, they're not the same. They're 3 separate characters.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on. Verse 8. And notice what happens to the 2 witnesses. So now we're back with the 2 witnesses here. And we look and we see that their dead bodies now lie in the street of the great city. Now, it's interesting to see John's description of the great city. He says it's spiritually called Sodom in Egypt. Sodom in Egypt. I think it's rather fascinating to see that description here. Sodom, in the sense that Sodom was known for its arrogance. It was known for its debauchery. It was known, well, we kind of know what Sodom was known for. But also, it's also called Egypt. And Egypt, you remember, in Jewish history was the place of slavery. That was the place of oppression. That's where the Jews were oppressed. Both places were reprehensible in Jewish history. They were places you did not want to be identified with. And spiritually, it says, John says, it was Sodom and Egypt. And then he says, then where also our Lord was crucified. So it's a reference to the condition of Jerusalem, not only at the time that Christ was crucified, but also at its time right now. And I think part of the reason why John describes it as such is because at this point now, this beast that comes from the sea, this beast that comes from the bottomless pit, this world ruler has now taken control of the city. And he has now established that he is the only God that is going to be worshiped. And so anybody that resists him is subject to death. And so John is pointing out Jerusalem has gone to pot. It's Sodom, it's Egypt, it's where our Lord was crucified. And so now these guys, these two witnesses, their bodies lay out in the street for 3.5 days. Now, here's something that gets fascinating at this point. They're out there 3.5 days. And then verse 9 says, those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days and not allow their dead bodies to be put into graves. Now, it's interesting here that John reports that the entire earth, this will be a worldwide event, and everyone will know that these two guys are dead. Partly, and part of the joy that they're going to have is because these guys they had the authority and the power to send plagues anywhere in the world at any time that they wanted. So the entire world was the recipient of the plagues sent from these two witnesses. So it's fascinating here to see the worldwide event. Jack, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was wondering is that during this time when these false prophets have been executed by the beast, what is the situation with the 12,000 witnesses or the 144,000 witnesses? Are they still going around witnessing at this time, or have they stopped also?
Well, I think it doesn't say that they stopped, but if you remember that in chapter 7, they were sealed. That they were set apart and they were sealed, and the reason they were sealed was so that nothing would harm them.
So then they couldn't be hurt by anybody,
They would not be hurt. They can't be hurt. They're still going to keep doing what they do. They're going to keep preaching. They're going to keep preaching. It's a good question. So here's what the spectacle. These guys are out in the street. Their bodies are in the street for 3.5 days, and everybody sees it. Now, what's fascinating to think about this, 100 years ago, this would have been unfathomable. How could the whole world see their bodies? And now we fast forward 100 years, not that big a deal now, huh?
No, not with the internet.
Everybody's got a phone and everybody's taking videos, and it's all over in a matter of seconds. Everybody can see it. You can put a live feed there and watch them. watch a couple of dead bodies do absolutely nothing.
Almost everyone's got a cell phone now.
You could do that. So I find that rather fascinating to see that we're moving in this direction, aren't we? We're moving in this direction. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen and it's going to happen tomorrow. It could happen very soon, but it's very interesting to see how the trend moves this way. But Now, verse 10, notice what happens. Those who dwell on the earth. And so again, everybody in the earth knows about this. This is a worldwide event. They will rejoice over this and make merry and send gifts to one another. Like Christmas. I mean, it is just like Christmas. And they're celebrating because, John says, these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So you almost have a blend of Christmas. You can almost hear Andy Williams singing "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year." And you can almost hear the Munchkins singing "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead," can't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all kind of blending together with this. They're thrilled. They're happy about this.
Well, not everybody will celebrate though.
No, but notice that it's going to be those who are not believers. It's those who have sworn allegiance to the beast that are doing that, but they are thrilled. Okay, so now we've got this 3.5 day party that's going on. Everybody giving gifts, and they're sending gifts to each other all over the world, and business is booming all over the place. It's, all the merchants of the world probably, coming out in the black because they're able to sell their products, all those kind of things. You see all that happening. So looking at verses 8 and 9 and 10, any questions or observations so far on those three verses? 8, 9, and 10.
No.
Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't there a Jewish rule that the bodies have to be buried before 3.5 days?
Yes, it's a good point. It's a good point. They have to be buried 3.5 days and they don't get buried.
I have a question. It says
So
these two
it's
prophets
the
were
ultimate,
tormented.
it's the ultimate insult, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the ultimate humiliation and insult. Okay, Jack, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, it says that these two prophets were tormented before they
No.
were killed.
No, it's not what it says.
No, they did the tormenting.
They did the tormenting because these two prophets
Oh, they
tormented.
were the ones that tormented the others. Okay.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
The unbelievers didn't want to hear their message.
Nope. And they didn't want to, at the same time, they wanted to oppose them, but they were afraid to because, well, they valued their own lives. So now we get to verse 11. We get to verse 11. Now, after the 3.5 days, notice what happens. The breath of life from God entered them. The breath of life from God. So and the word breath is also the word for wind. It's also the word for spirit. It's better here, I think, translated breath.
Is that how God breathed into Adam?
It's similar.
Yeah.
It's similar. So you see the breath of life entering them, and they stand on their feet. Now, remember what's happening here. What's going on here? We've got cameras on these guys. We've got surveillance cameras. We've got, 24-hour monitors, 24-hour feeds. You can go on to, just for our discussion, you can go onto the website and you can see the live cam of the two prophets that are dead in the street. And can you just imagine if that's the case, just say they did have a live cam and they're showing these two bodies out in the street, and then all of a sudden these two bodies stand straight up and they're alive. It says then, and great fear fell on those who saw them. So it's not just the people in Jerusalem. It would be the people who would be viewing the live feed, the live cam. It would be those people, and they are terrified. I mean, talk about a scary movie. That's something they didn't anticipate. These two guys coming back to life. So that's after 3.5 days. And now notice in verse 12, then, they hear a loud voice from heaven. And as you go through the book of Revelation, many times you'll hear the loud voice from heaven. And it seems to be that is the voice of God. It seems to be that is the voice of God. John typically will identify voices of angels as an angel's voice. But when he talks about the loud voice, it seems that there's that trend that it's referring to God. So I'll suggest that. And that would be completely accurate as far as the authority of this loud voice, because notice what the loud voice says: come up here. And so thus they ascend to heaven. So that voice seems to be that of God, and he gives them the order, come up here. And so
Wasn't that similar to the children of Israel when they didn't want God to speak, but Moses to go up and see what he wanted because they were afraid of his voice?
Could have been, yeah. I think you see some parallels there.
It would be like thunder almost.
It would be rather loud,
Yeah.
but notice what happens. Okay, there were people who saw them stand up on their feet, and they were in great fear. It was a terrifying fear. John is using superlatives to describe this. Great fear fell on him. And so now the voice says, come up here, and now they ascend to heaven. And notice that John says their enemies saw them. So it wasn't as though they just vanished, but the enemy saw them ascend up to heaven. So they saw their physical bodies go up there.
Just like Jesus rose up when he left the others.
That would be the one analogy, wouldn't it? It would be the one thing that would be similar, would be Jesus ascending. Okay, so now notice what happens in verse 13. In the same hour, there was a great earthquake. Now it's interesting to note that there's a great earthquake here. If you were to do a study in the book of Revelation on the earthquakes, you'll see that there are 5 earthquakes that are described. 5 earthquakes that are described. One of them ends marks the end of the 7 seals of judgment. One marks near the end of the 7 trumpets. And then there's another there's 2 other earthquakes that are involved, and then there's this one. In this earthquake, there are 7,000 people killed, and 1/10 of the city of Jerusalem's leveled. But what's interesting is that when you go further in the book of Revelation, you get to the last earthquake. John says there was a great earthquake, and there's never been an earthquake like this one ever before or ever since. So notice this one is more severe than the others, but it's still not as severe as the very last one. But it's interesting.
Probably a 10 on the Richter scale.
But it's interesting to see that it's an earthquake.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting to see this. So you see 1/10 of the city fall. You see 7,000 people killed. But notice this last sentence here. The rest were afraid and gave glory to the God of heaven. Now, does that mean that all of a sudden they became believers and said, oh, we believe that God is real, and oh, we believe that God is the one that it should be worshipped, and not this beast, not this guy that's commanding our rule? Is that what that means?
No, I think they just gave recognition that there is a God.
Okay.
Close.
All right. Yeah, I think you're pretty close. I think it almost sounds like an insurance agent, doesn't it?
Yeah.
selling you a policy that's going to protect your house from fire and from theft and from this and from that, from floods, or quote, an act of God. You could buy insurance coverage for an act of God, and that's kind of what this sounds like. They're just saying, oh, it's an act of God. Not repentant, not believing, but just dismissing it. Like, well, yep, it's an earthquake, act of God. If you have act of God coverage, then you're okay. If not, then sorry, your policy doesn't cover it. So you got that earthquake. Susie, I see your hand up. Got to unmute.
Sorry. Okay, at this point, have some of the people accepted the mark of the beast?
I believe so. And the reason I say that is that this seems to be at the halfway mark of the 7-year tribulation. And it seems that when you look at the timing of everything, that at the halfway point, that's when this man of sin, beast of the sea, rider on the white horse, this guy is killed, but comes back to life again. He stands in the most holy place in the temple and declares himself to be God. And it's at that point that he issues, the edict that in order to stay alive and to stay living in my world, you have to take my mark of loyalty. And that's going to be how you buy, and that's going to be how you sell, but it's going to be a mark of loyalty to me, your God. And so at that point, I think that there are going to be people that at this point have taken that mark. How many? Don't know.
Okay. Well, could the rest here be those who were undecided?
It's a good question. It could be. It could be. It sounds, though, like the inclination of the world at this time is still going to be to dismiss it as a mere act of God. It seems that way, but I'm not going to rule out that, I don't know that everybody gets the mark all at the same time simultaneously. I think there's probably a time span, and there's going to be a little bit of a time lag, and there will be some people that haven't yet, that, there's still a chance that they may have their eyes open and all this comes together, and wow, maybe what these two guys were saying really was true after all. Maybe what this Jesus that they're talking about is really the Son of God, and that he does give everlasting life to everyone who believes in it. Maybe that's true. So, I wouldn't rule that out by any means. It seems though that may not be that many that do.
Okay.
That makes just my take, and I could be totally wrong on that for sure. Totally wrong. Jack, I saw your hand up too.
Right.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
When the church is taken out at the rapture, there'll be a lot of people left behind, but there'll be a lot of people that will disappear from the face of the earth. And what do you think the people are going to think? Because there'll probably be automobile crashes, there'll be automobiles, then airplanes crashing, especially with pilots that were taken out. So all chaos would be on the earth at that time. Wouldn't that make people believe these things are true?
Well, I think you have to remember the nature of fallen humanity. I think you have to remember that the nature of fallen humanity is hostile to the things of God. Paul says the natural man does not understand the things of God. He cannot discern them because they're spiritually appraised. And so while there would be some who would be quickened to hearing, why did this happen? There are going to be others that will just be mad at God. They'll just be angry that they refuse to believe. Their hearts are that hard. And I think it's important to remember that we cannot ever underestimate the level of depravity, the level of the hardness that a human heart can be. Sometimes it's just mind-boggling to us to see, you've got all of this evidence, you have all of this stuff happening right in front of you, and yet you still refuse to believe. You still aren't convinced. You still don't acknowledge that Jesus is who he says he is. It's foreign to us because we know him, but to that hard heart, they still continue to shake their fist. And I guarantee that because of that hardness, there's going to be a lot of people standing in line at the great white throne judgment. When their names aren't found written in the book of life and they're thrown into the lake of fire, they're going to go shaking their fist in anger and defiance. They'll remain defiant. I guarantee you, Satan.
Is that why it says broad is the way that leads to destruction and narrow is the way that leads to salvation, and very few people find it? I
guarantee you that Satan is not going to go into the lake of fire saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done all that." I guarantee you, he won't be doing that. And so it's not going to be surprising to see a great swath of humanity be sent the same way and go in the same way.
Now, the beast and false prophet are thrown in first, right?
Right. Okay. So keep track here with this. All right. So now getting back to this, now notice here that John tells us the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. And if you remember in this, that if you go back to, I think it's Revelation 9:12, we'll just take a trip there, 9 and verse 12. Notice that one woe has passed here in 9:12. What is the woe? It's that fifth trumpet. Okay, so the fifth trumpet are the crazy locusts that came out. Okay, so and so that was the first woe. And you might be thinking, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about the woes? If you remember, we in the seven trumpets that pronounced the second set of judgments from God on the face of the earth, you had trumpet number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 that burned up a third of the vegetation. It destroyed a third of the salt of the oceans, a third of the fresh water supply, and so on. And then in verse 13, Paul looks up and he heard an angel or an eagle, depending on your version, your translation, flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe," 3 woes, "to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound." Okay, so the fifth trumpet is that first woe. Okay, fifth trumpet, first woe. Now the sixth trumpet, you don't get that second woe. You don't get the second woe until you go all the way down to chapter 11 and you come down to verse 14. So I'm scrolling down here on the left and we go down here to verse 14, and this is where we find the second woe. Okay, so the sixth trumpet sounds. All of this happens in chapter 10 and chapter 11, and now he says the second woe is past. Okay, so based on all of this, it seems as though the midway point, the 3.5-year mark, seems to be in between the 6th trumpet and the 7th trumpet. Seems to be right there. Okay, so the 7th trumpet, if you look, and we'll get into this next week, we'll get into the worship, we'll get into the earthquake, and we'll get into the introduction to the next set of judgments, which is going to be the 7 bowls. But what's going to happen in between is that John is going to step back and he's going to be introducing all the other players into this whole tribulation. So he's going to go to chapter 12 and he's going to introduce Satan and introduce how he has interacted with Israel and how he's interacted with Jews and with Christians, and how he's going to be interacting and how he's going to be the adversary throughout all of this. And then you go to chapter 13 and you see who he enlists as part of his unholy trinity, the beast of the sea and the beast of the land. They come together and they work together with Satan, the dragon, to set up this world system, this world political system, this world religious system, and they work together to set all of that up. And it all focuses back ultimately on this singular person, the beast from the sea, the beast from the bottomless pit. And then we continue on. Okay, so John is going to be introducing all of these people in before we get to the 7 bowls. So we're going to go back in time, we'll go forward in time, and then we'll go back a little further in time and we'll go forward. And then we'll be doing this back and forth. So that you know, and that it, as far as, you know, how we process this, maybe it helps to make a little more sense. So having said that, did I lose anybody? Did I go too fast, or did I not explain something, or something still a little fuzzy?
Will this information help us to maybe tell people about the future and how important it is to avoid all this?
I think, Jack, that when you stick to the basic truth of the Word of God, and you
Just Romans 10, 9, 10, right?
I would stick to John 3:16.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my go-to, is John 3:16. Very easy. Whoever believes in Jesus will not perish but have everlasting life.
Right.
I think you're better to stay there, because that's going to say enough to quicken the heart. I think the Holy Spirit can work with that verse and do all the work that you'd want to do, you'd want to see done.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I have 2 things. People don't realize it nowadays, but there are cameras everywhere in the towns and around. Businesses have the cameras, and almost every person nowadays has a camera in their pocket. And when a shooting goes on or a robbery, someone's going to get a picture of that event. So I see there's no trouble with everyone seeing the 2 witnesses at all. And cameras are prevalent nowadays.
Okay.
And the other one is, you mentioned the rapture, and the dead in Christ shall rise first, and then those who remain will meet the Lord in the air. Okay. We talked about, mentioned airplanes flying. I cannot, over the US at any one time, there are thousands of airplanes, jets flying to their destination. I can't believe that if the pilots left that airplane, they would all crash. I just can't believe the Lord would let that happen. But when we rise to meet the Lord in the air, we have our new bodies. And the pilots will still, if they're called, they still have their earthly body to fly the plane. Now, is
The
that too far?
co-pilot, if he's an unbeliever, yes.
Is that too far to stretch? What if both pilots were called away? See,
Then the plane crashes.
I can't believe that. The Lord would let thousands of planes crash.
Well,
Well, that's what's
Let
going to
me,
happen.
let me
That's
speak to
good.
that.
Yeah,
Right.
Let me,
go ahead,
let me
Dale.
speak. My brother, he was an airline pilot, retired. They used to have meetings and Bible studies, and they made them anyone that was the co-pilot would not be a Christian.
Yeah, let me speak to that.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Dale.
The airliners nowadays are, in fact, almost all of them, capable of flying almost an entire flight without the pilot, including landing. And many times, if you fly very often, you have already landed hands off on some of the flights.
Yeah, but Dale, doesn't the place
that's-
where the control tower operate that?
No,
No.
it's done through the inertial navigation system, which is all updated by the satellites all the time.
Well, that
And
is really
ground
good
is all
news.
just keeping track.
I'm glad to hear that.
Now, the pilots don't use that automatic landing system a whole lot of the time because they like to get the practice landing, and also there's a little bit of distrust in that when you're getting close to the ground. Is the machine really doing what it's supposed to do?
Well,
But it's
Right.
been many years that the automatic landing system has been in existence.
Yeah.
I think, and going back to Jim's original concern, one thing I also want to add to it, Jim, is that the initial rapture is, there's going to be destruction, there's going to be devastation in the aftermath of that, but it's going to pale compared to the 21 judgments that you're going to see God bring upon the earth at this time. So it stands to reason that when the Lord takes his church out, that the earth is vulnerable to judgment, and there's going to be a considerable loss of life. There are going to be billions of people dying, billions of people dying. John describes that as such. So, we have to remember that while at the same time God is a God of love, he is a God of grace, he is a God of mercy, he is equally a God of judgment, he is equally a God of wrath, and you cannot divorce his love from his wrath. You cannot divorce his mercy and grace from his justice. All of it comes together. We can't distinguish or separate any of that. And so for all of this to begin and to consist for 7 years, remember also that Jesus said this in Matthew 24. He's talking specifically about the tribulation. He said, if God had not cut the day short, no one would survive. So even in his judgment, he's merciful in that there will be people that will survive. But if he hadn't, no one would, Jesus said. So I think it's important to keep all that and weigh all that equally and understand that this is all a part of the God that we serve.
Pastor?
So keep that in mind. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, physically, though, there should be a lot of people going into the millennium, right?
Well, I don't know.
And that happens right after the 7 years, right, of the tribulation?
Yeah. And we've talked about the numbers before.
Yeah.
We've talked about the numbers before. Okay. Well, let me see if there's any other questions, comments, observations that you might have.
Oh, I have one that hasn't. It's
Okay.
barely is barely on the subject. It's easier to take off a jet than it is to land.
Okay.
When you come in for a landing, you're slowing down, but you got to keep enough airspeed so there's still lift under the planes. See
Okay.
what I'm saying? People don't realize that, how difficult that is.
Yep.
If you slow it down too much, the plane will crash. So,
Okay. Any other comments?
sorry. No, that's great. That's great to listen. I learned a lot, and I thought I knew a lot.
Good stuff. Just
The
one more.
autopilots are GPS controlled, and all of the plane's functions can be controlled from the autopilot. Computer telling it, the autopilot what it needs to do, and it will be doing it, and it can sense what the condition of the airplane is. It knows the airspeed, it knows the attitude, and all of these things. That you've got ground sensing radar, can tell just how many feet you are above the surface of the ground. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are possible even right today.
Good stuff. All right. I'm seeing no other comments, so I'm going to hit